When we think of Martin Luther, we usually picture this giant of history, right? A figure carved in stone. But to really get a handle on the man who kicked off the Reformation, we have to see him differently. We need to see him as he was, a young monk, absolutely terrified in the middle of a massive spiritual crisis.
Now, that is a shocking thing to hear, and it doesn't come from one of Luther's enemies. That's from Luther himself, a monk who said he hated God. This one sentence, believe it or not, is the key to unlocking his entire life and the firestorm that was about to happen. So how did he even get to that point?
So let's go back to the early 1500s. By all accounts, Luther was a top-notch Augustinian monk. He was doing everything right, following the rules, praying, fasting. He said he was living without reproach. But on the inside, he was being eaten alive by this constant gut-wrenching fear of God's judgment.
And here's the thing you have to get. For Luther, the whole idea of God's righteousness wasn't a comfort. Not at all. It was what he called God's active justice, that perfect holy standard that God uses to judge and punish people who fall short. It was a terrifyingly high bar, and he was convinced he could never, ever reach it.
This wasn't just some nagging doubt. He says he raged. He felt like the gospel, the good news, was just God piling on more pain by hanging his wrath over his head. Every time he heard about God's righteousness, it felt like another nail in his coffin, another reason he was doomed. His conscience was just in knots.
But here's what's interesting. Instead of making him run away from the Bible, all this desperation pushed him deeper into it. He zeroed in on the very verse that was torturing him, Romans 1:17, the one that talks about the righteousness of God being revealed. He just had to figure out what the Apostle Paul was really trying to say.
And listen to how he puts it. He beat upon the text. I mean, this was not some quiet academic study session. It was a fight, a relentless, desperate wrestling match with the words on the page. He thought about it day and night, just refusing to give up until he got an answer.
And then it happened. The light bulb went on. He finally saw it. The righteousness of God wasn't just the active righteousness that God demands from us. It was also a passive righteousness that God gives to us. It was a gift. It wasn't a standard you had to meet. It was a perfect status that was credited to you through faith. You can imagine this changed absolutely everything for him.
You could just feel the relief pouring out of these words. This wasn't just some new theological idea for him. It was like being born all over again. The terror was just gone. And in its place was this incredible joy. The very verse that had felt like a brick wall keeping him out of heaven suddenly became an open gate.
Now, a discovery this big couldn't just stay a private little secret. If salvation is a free gift you get by faith through what you read in Scripture, well, that sets up a massive collision. It all comes down to one question. Who has the final say? The Church and the Pope, or the book?
And right here, you can see the two sides drawn up. The official position, argued by one of Luther's opponents, was that the Pope is the infallible rule of faith, and the Bible gets its authority from the Church. Luther flipped that completely on its head. He argued for absolute obedience to Scripture, over popes, over councils. For him, the final word was the external word, the book itself.
Okay, so if the Bible has the final say, the next question is pretty obvious, right? How are you supposed to study it correctly? For Luther, this was no academic exercise. To really hear God's voice, you needed a certain method, one that was hammered out in his own difficult experience. He came up with 3 rules. First is oratio, which is prayer. Basically, he said to despair of your own smarts and just rely on the Spirit. Second, meditatio, or meditation. You have to really grapple with the text, strike it, as he said, until you get what it means. And third, tentatio, or suffering. Luther was certain that trials are the touchstone, that affliction is what really teaches you what the Scriptures are all about.
And this all brings us right back to where we started. Luther's whole life, his whole theology, was shaped by that desperate early search for grace. He began as a spiritual beggar, standing before a holy God. And you know what? That feeling of being a beggar never left him.
These were his last recorded words. He scribbled them on a piece of paper just before he died. "We are beggars, this is true." I mean, what a perfect summary of his life's biggest discovery. We don't bring anything to the table. Everything we get is a gift, received by faith. We are completely dependent on God's grace. You see, Luther's story kicks off with one guy, one Bible, and one agonizing question. And it ends with the whole world being turned upside down. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the connection between our own personal convictions
and the systems of authority that are all around us today.